it's Jenna Harte here, and thank you so much for tuning in to another Love Lore episode. Now, I know my last one about Cupid and Psyche was really long. This one I'm going to try and keep shorter. Today we're going to tell the story of Roswell and Lillian. Now, this story is actually really old. The first known written account is in 1663, but it is believed to be older, and one of the reasons it has stood the test of time, even before it was written down, was that it was very popular. Now, there are some other similar stories to it, one being the Lord of Lorn and the False Steward, as well as a Grimm's fairy tale, the Goose Girl, which is a similar story, only told with a female protagonist, whereas in the case of Roswell and Lillian, he is our protagonist. So let's go ahead and get started with the story. Now, once upon a time, there was a king in Naples, and he had a beautiful wife, and she gave him an extremely handsome son. This son was so handsome, he was even more beautiful than Ulysses or Achilles or even Sir Lancelot. And not only was he beautiful on the outside, but he was beautiful on the inside. He was really a good person. And one day, as a young man, he was out walking, and he walked past the jail, and inside he heard such suffering and despair, and it broke his heart, and he really thought he should do something. Now, he knew that every night that the jailers would give the key to his father, the king, for holding overnight. And so he decided to steal the key from the king and set these poor prisoners free, which he did. When he opened the jail, he found 3 foreign lords who had been kept there for treason or crimes against the land. And Roswell just felt so bad for them that he set them free. And the men were so happy to be set free that they told him that if they could ever return the favor, that they would. And off they went. Now, the next day, when the jailers came to the king and he told him that the prisoners were gone, the king was livid and vowed to execute whoever it was that set them free. And so you can imagine his distress when it turns out it was his own son that let these prisoners go. Now, at first, he was very much going to follow through on his threat, because a king's power comes from being believed. And so he was prepared to hang or even kill with his own hands his own son. But his wife pled for him not to do that. And so it was determined that instead Roswell will be exiled. Now, of course, they just didn't kick him out of the castle. They did give him some money and they gave him some letters and sent him to another realm where they hoped they would take him in. And for this journey, they also gave him a steward to assist him as he went along the way. So off he goes out into the world with his steward, heading towards this other realm that they hope will take him in. And along the journey, it was a long one, they stopped by a river, and he's very, very thirsty. And it's at this point that the steward, who is sick and tired of being told what to do, decides to change his fortune. And he does it by threatening to throw Roswell into the river to die. But he can save himself by trading clothes and giving this steward all his money and the letters. And basically what they do is they trade places. So now poor little Roswell is the steward, and the steward becomes the fake Roswell, the fake Prince of Naples, as they head on their journey. Now, as they get close to this other realm, Roswell finds a chance to escape, and he does, and he runs off into the village. And the steward doesn't really think very much of it, because he's reached his destination, and he enters into this kingdom pretending to be the prince and is treated as such. After all, he has the clothes and he has the letters. Now, Roswell doesn't know what to do. He's still actually fairly young, hasn't really been on his own, and has always had a steward to take care of him. But he finds a hut, and there he goes, and he asks the old woman there if she would be willing to feed him and shelter him for the night. Well, she's a very kind woman, and she takes him in, telling him that she has a son who's at school, who's about his age, and he would love to have a friend. So Roswell is taken in by this woman, and not only does he stay the night, but she convinces him to stay and be a family with him. And Roswell has very fine manners, and she suspects that perhaps he comes from some sort of royalty or money, but he assures her that he doesn't, and instead he just lives this regular life, and he goes to school every day with her son. And at school, he does very well, and the master is very impressed with him, and is always being kind to him and good to him. And so, despite the fact not being royal anymore, Roswell has a pretty good life going on. Until one day, the steward, who is now pretending to be the prince, happens to see him at school. And of course, this just will not do. So the steward convinces the woman that Roswell needs to go to the castle and work there. And she doesn't want to let him go, but she does. And so Roswell is brought up to the castle and forced to work. And of course, he has very fine manners. He's very polished. He does very well. And he catches the eye of the princess Lillian, who eventually takes him on as her steward. Now, the pretend prince, the false prince, isn't very excited about this, but there's very little that he can do about it. And so now Roswell is working as a steward for the princess. And again, he has very fine manners. He's very polished. And she also suspects that perhaps he's from royalty, but he assures her that he is not. Now, why he's keeping the secret, I don't know, but he does. So he keeps the secret. And over time, Lillian falls in love with Roswell. And of course, he falls in love with her. But of course, as happened in a lot of these stories, it's a bad match because she's royalty and he's believed to be from nothing. What are they going to do? So they go on, and eventually Roswell's father and mother, they're missing him. They wish he were home. And in contacting the king of the new realm, it is determined that Roswell and Lillian should get married. But you have to remember that the king of Naples doesn't realize that his steward is pretending to be Roswell. That's what he's thinking. He's thinking his son is going to marry Lillian, when in fact he's basically said his steward can marry Lillian. And the king of the new realm doesn't know either. So basically, it's set up for this fake prince, the steward, to marry Lillian. Now, Lillian is very upset with this because she wants to marry Roswell, who is going by a fake name, by the way. And the king is like, you know, that's all nice and good, except no, because he comes from nothing. You have to marry another royal. Well, she's very upset by this, but there's not a whole lot she can do. And as the marriage approaches, there is a big feast and tournament. It's a 3-day tournament. And on the first day, Roswell rides out into the forest with his dogs and he loves the forest, he loves the birds and nature and everything. And he comes across a knight with a white horse. He's all dressed in white. And the knight basically says to him, look, we need to trade places. You wear my stuff, you take my horse, you go to the tournament, you win the tournament, and when you're done, you come back here, we'll trade back. And Roswell's like, okay. And so he does. They switch clothes. He goes to the tournament. He knocks everybody down, including the fake prince. And he wins the tournament. And the king is very happy and says, look, if you come, you can marry my daughter. But by then, Roswell's riding back out to the forest and switching with the knight. Then he goes back into the castle as regular Roswell again. Now, the princess thinks she's on to him. She accuses him of being the White Knight, and Roswell's like, look, I didn't grow up knowing all this stuff. I couldn't have done that. You've got it wrong. Well, the next day it happens again, and this time Roswell's out in the forest, and this time another night he's dressed in gray. He's got a gray horse, and again he's like, we should trade places, and Roswell does, and he goes and wins the next day of tournaments, and again the king is like, bring this guy to me, but by then Roswell is gone. He's back in the forest. He's traded places with the gray knight again, and now he's his regular self, and Lillian again is like, this has to be you, and he's like, it's not me. And again, it happens for the third day. This time a knight comes in, and he's all dressed in red. They trade places. He wins the tournament, and he goes back out. And so in the end, Lillian ends up having to marry the fake prince. Now, I know you're probably wondering, wait, what? That could be the end of the story? Fortunately, it's not the end of the story. But she does marry the fake steward, or the steward who's pretending to be the prince. And during the day of the feast, she's pretty miserable about it. Roswell's not very happy about it. And but they're having the feast, and there's all the music and everything. And in come the three knights that Roswell met out in the woods. And they bow to the king, they bow to Lillian, but they refuse to bow to the fake prince, the steward. And the king is like, what are you doing? You can't ignore him. He's royalty. But instead, the three knights go over to Roswell, and they bow before him and acknowledge him as the true royalty. And it turns out these three knights are the three prisoners that Roswell had let go way back when, the action that got him exiled. Well, when the king realizes what has happened, the fake prince, the steward, is hung. And instead, Roswell is able to marry Lillian. And of course, they live happily ever after. And Roswell continues to be a good guy. He takes care of the woman and her son that took him in. He takes care of the master at the school who took care of him. He and Lillian end up having 5 beautiful children. 2 of them become kings. 1 of them becomes a pope. The daughters marry kings. And they just all live to be very happy. They live long lives. And that is the story of Roswell and Lillian. Well, I hope you enjoyed this story. This is actually one of my favorite ones that I've come across in my research for the Sophie Parker Mystery Series, partly because it ends well, and of course I love stories like that, but I also love the idea of this boy prince who is good and stays good throughout the course of the story and through his life. If you have fairy tales or folklore or other stories, especially those that involve love and happily ever after, I would love to hear about them. I do have some other ones that I plan to bring to you in this series of videos about love lore. Now, until next time, this is Jenna Harte wishing you peace, love, and happily ever after. Ow.